Hey everybody, Anthony here, FSU Off-Road. Welcome back to another video and welcome back to our Jeep build. Today we're working on a few things. One, right now we don't have any bump stops. And two, we don't have any limit straps. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Let's get to it. Now, you might be wondering, do I need bump stops? Do I need limit straps? The easiest way that I can put it is yes. Whether you're running leaf springs, whether you're running coilovers, whether you're running just regular coils, they're kind of needed. Now, if you've ever seen, a Jeep flexing that doesn't have containers on this coil springs, you've seen the coil spring actually pop out. Well, what a limit strap is going to do, I've got a few right here, just off of an old rig. What they're going to do is they're going to actually limit the travel of the axle, so that coil spring that pops out is not going to come out. Same thing with these coilovers. When a coilover is at full maximum, droop, it's going to pull these internals, and we don't want that. We want to save our coilovers as much as possible. So what you do is you put limit straps from the chassis to the axle to limit the actual droop. Now, depending on what kind you get, they are going to stretch. So you want to take in consideration of that whenever you are measuring. Now, I also mentioned bump stops. Why are bump stops important? Well, it goes with the same as the limit straps. As the axle articulates up, you don't want your shock being your bump stop. Because again, if this keeps bottoming out, eventually you're going to lose that bottom cap, you're going to damage the internals, and you don't want that. That is for coilovers. Now for coil springs and things like that, it's a little different. However, you don't want your axle beating against the chassis as a bump stop. That's why bump stops are incorporated on all stock vehicles. Now for this instance, what we have is a hydraulic bump stop. Now this is 4 inches travel from Locked Off Road, one of our sponsors. So go check them out. Riley's a super nice guy, super knowledgeable, and that's what we're going to be running suspension wise on Tinkerita here. Now, are these hydraulic bump stops needed for every application? No. I've had polyurethane bump stops and they work just fine. However, these add adjustability to the suspension. So I got 4 inches for the rear, we got 2 inches for the front, and you can just fine tune those. You can fine tune your suspension a little bit better with hydraulic bump stops versus any other kind of bump stop that's going to be more of an abrupt impact. This is going to ease the impact a little bit better, taking away from possible damage to the chassis. Now this is a 2-inch in diameter. They make these in 2.5-inch diameters. They make them in 4-inch stroke. They make them in 2-inch stroke, 3-inch stroke. They make them top mounted. This is a pinch style. They also make like a can where it tightens and secures from the top. And they also make threaded styles. If you have a JK, you might want to check that out. They make a drop-in replacement for JKs for the thread-in styles. So we're going to work on getting these installed and our limit straps installed, and kind of go over how we're going to get those installed on the chassis. Okay, so I brought you a little bit closer. So I've unpressurized this bump stop, and you can kind of see how this is going to sit. You want to center it on your axle as much as possible. So we'll have to build, a bump plate or a bump pad or whatever you want to call it for this. But the downside to this whole design is it's only on one bar. And I don't want this beating and banging against one bar. I'm going to tie it into this upper bar, and as well as doing a secondary support bar on the back side. That way it'll eliminate any kind of twisting of this bar whenever the bump pad or when the bump stop gets hit. It doesn't want to twist this bar in, causing any kind of failures or anything like that. So we're going to support this up first and get it all nice and tied in and secured, and we'll integrate this upper support bar as well. That way we have 3 bars going to one bump pad on both sides, and that should eliminate any kind of flexing, tweaking of the tube and chassis. So with that being said, I'm going to cut some tubing and kind of get this mocked up really quick. As you can see, got both sides notched And going back to the support place, now we can start fabbing up some brackets for our bump stops. And it's going to take a little bit of time because we're going to build some templates, obviously out of cardboard, and then see how they're going to align, see how we can get them mocked up. As you can see, we got our hydraulic bump stop all mounted up and installed where it needs to be. Now I'm going to take you through how I got it to where it is now. First things first, I went ahead and took all the nitrogen out of our hydraulic bump stop, put it in the can, and kind of got an angle or a variation of where we was going to put it. Now, due to the bar here, I couldn't necessarily put it back here. I could have, but you're really limited on what you can mount. So once I figured out where I wanted it, I've decided to utilize this bar for stability. That way there'll be two bars connected to it versus just one, and eliminating the possible of twisting this bar. Now, once I figured out the placement of kind of where it was going to line up, I needed to take into consideration our sway bar arm. Now, our sway bar arm is going to be 16 inches from the back to the front to the axle, so we could possibly mount it back here somewhere. So what I did, I mounted from where the end of the sway bar will be here, I measured 16 inches. So once you center that, it'll be moved back to 15 inches. So it'll give us an inch of clearance between the actual bump stop and the sway bar arms. It's not a lot, but there shouldn't be any clearance issues. And if there is, we can obviously move our sway bar mount back an inch or two depending on what needs to happen. But after I got all that figured out, what I did was I cut a piece of plate, just some scrap material that I have here. And what that's going to do is that's going to mount to the chassis there, and it's also going to attach our bump stop can like so. And then I just drilled out a hole, obviously, for just drainage and dirt and debris and all that stuff. And I got it centered on this bar because the way it lined up was perfect to the axle, at least for the gap that we needed for the bump stop at full bump. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get this mounted on there and tacked in place with our 16 inches behind it. Now, in order to make sure that it is parallel with the chassis, I just break out my old square here, my electronic square. I zero it out on the chassis, and then I actually put it on the plate itself to make sure that it's pretty close. As you can see, it's within 1 degree. We'll adjust it accordingly here to get it as level as possible. Oh, too much. There we go. We got it zeroed out there, zeroed out on the chassis. And it's time to put a secondary tack on there. That way it holds in place. Okay. Now, I'm not worried about up and down at the moment. I was worried about being square because the next thing that I did, once I got that tack welded in place, I was able to determine an ideal location, or at least from the gap from the bottom to where our bump was going to sit, which was 3/16 of an inch. So basically, I got just a scrap piece of material, put it there, and then I put another plate underneath that, like so. And this is going to give me 3/16 of a gap, and then that'll allow me to weld, to tack weld our cup into place and give us the gap that we need from the bottom for the bump stop. Or you can kind of see how this creates a pocket there for our housing, and we can just kind of like sit this in place and put a nice tack weld on it, and it'll give us a 3/16 gap on the bottom. All right, you can see it there. Now, once I had it in this state on the other side, I knew this was pretty close to where I was going to go. So what I did was I went ahead and template out some cardboard templates and kind of gave me a design of what I wanted to attach both the back and the front along with the bar and kind of incorporate everything. So I went ahead and got them close, front piece, back piece, got everything nice and secured, and then I painstakingly went through and cut out each and every plate, and then I added some relief holes to cut it out. Again, just allow for draining. You can wash out the mud and all that stuff without fully enclosing it. Could have fully enclosed it, but I felt like it wasn't necessarily necessary in this instance. Now, one thing on the other side, at this point I did have the bump in, and I actually flexed out the axle, and I wanted to make sure that there was not going to be any clearances with the tire actually on. And there's roughly a 1/4 inch gap from this pinch point up here to the tire at full bump, so shouldn't have any issues there. And obviously that was at full droop, and that stuff is going to be limited a little bit because of the actual bump pads and the limit straps. So there's tons of clearance there and shouldn't have any issues moving forward. As you can see, went ahead and put the front plate on there, and that's kind of what I worked on the other side. That way I could kind of tack it, at least get one plate tacked in place to help square up the can as best as possible. And once we got that set, then I was just able to put the back plate on like so and just tack it in place as well. And you may be wondering why I chamfered the bottom here. That way it'll give me a better place to weld, because we are mounting this flush on the back side. There's plenty of weld here, there's plenty of places to weld here, but I wanted to add a little bit of extra place to weld on the bottom plate there. So I'm gonna go ahead, get this tack welded in place and squared up with our handy dandy little level here. Now, the last piece of the puzzle is this piece right here, which goes on the back side here, kind of in between the two plates, and it almost fits perfectly, just so close. What I'll do is I'll trim this up, get it in place, tack weld it, same process as before, and yep, just like so, and we can continue on with this project. The last thing that we need to do to complete this is add a bump pad on the axle. So I went ahead and pre-cut, as you saw, pre-cut everything. I'm just going to duplicate from the other side, because what I did, once it was all flexed out, once I had it completely flexed out, I made a center mark of where the actual bump stop would hit. So I used that measurement along with the full bump measurement from here, and it was only off about ½ inch, so that's not very far. And I'm going to utilize that to put this and duplicate this from the other side. And then this side is going to be all tacked and put together just like the other side. And that will take care of the bump stops, bump pads for the axle, everything like that. Then, once you've got everything fully bumped, you take the axle and move it all the way down to get your limit straps. But the good thing with it being a full bump, you can figure out where your brackets are going to go. So we'll have to do that as well with our limit straps. Equally as important as your bump stops, no matter whether you're running polyurethanes, hydraulic bump stops, whatever, everything in between, you really want to utilize limit straps to save your shock from pulling out. Basically, all a limit strap is a nylon strap, and you attach it to the axle, you attach it to the chassis, and once it is at full droop, obviously it can't go no more. Now, the easiest way to attach your limit straps is with these brackets right here for limit straps. They're relatively inexpensive. I think you can get a pair of them off Barnes or TMR Customs or anything like that for, you know, about $8 a piece or so. And in the grand scheme of things, you can't make it for that. So it's worth it. Now, they do have another option to these to where you could adjust it that is on a clevis, and you can tighten the clevis up and down. Those are a little bit more expensive, but it does help you fine tune your suspension a little bit better. Now, with your limit straps, there's going to be two big differences in your limit straps, and you do want to spend a little bit more money on limit straps versus cheap ones. As you can see here, this is just a cheap single ply. You can see how floppy these are. Now the issue with that is you can see at the bottom that these have started fraying and they will rip through eventually. So that's an issue whenever you get like a single ply strap. Now these on the other hand are quad wrapped. Actually this one's a triple wrap, and they also make quad wraps. But this one's double wrapped on the end, and you're not going to have any wear and tear on this unit. And you can see these are a lot more stiff than these single plies. You can kind of see. And now for something like this, we're definitely going to go with the more durable quad wraps from TMR Customs. So what we need to do is we need to get our mounts on the chassis and get our links. Now, one thing to note on all limit straps, no matter what, is they're going to stretch. So you have to take that into consideration. They roughly say every 12 inches it's going to stretch 1 inch off the overall length. So if you're running, you know, a 24-inch limit strap, expect a 2-inch stretch in that. So you want to make sure you're not extending this past the 2 inches of that stretch. So take that into consideration whenever you're doing yours, and make note of that. And obviously there's places out there that'll kind of give you a rundown of what each limit strap will stretch to. Maybe I'll show you a picture here on the video. TMR Customs, they give you what it is, what size limit strap it is from eyelet, center eyelet to center eyelet, and then what the overall stretch is going to be for that, so you can kind of get a total. But anyway, next thing we got to do is we need to figure out where we're going to mount these on the chassis and the axle itself without them interfering, because our axle comes so close to the chassis. So we need to figure that out and get these mounted and take our measurements. That way we can get our limit straps on order. As you can see, went ahead and got the straps put in place. Just put it on the actual chassis here where it's actually supported with this bar. That way there shouldn't be any issues there. Got a double shear bracket, and I trimmed it to fit on the lower part of the axle. And at full bump, there's no interference there. So we don't have any issues. To get the actual links that I need, I dropped the axle all the way down to where it was just held up with the coilovers, and it was 23 inches from the center of the bolts from the top to bottom. So you just take 23 inches times 0.9, and it was roughly 21 and some inches. It was a little over 21 inches. So what I'll do is I'll get 20-inch limit straps, and we shouldn't have a problem. That is the downside to this style mount versus like the clevis that can actually have adjustability. But for longevity and ease of installation and trackability to make sure nothing comes loose or anything like that, I'd rather have these mounts versus the clevis style mounts. So with this being done, that's going to conclude this video. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you leave a comment if you have a question, or maybe I did something wrong and you want to correct me. That's fine too. Don't have a problem with that. But most importantly, subscribe if you haven't already, because I know a lot of you aren't subscribers. But do those few things for me. Stay tuned. We got a lot more work to do, and we'll see you guys in the next one. I'm gonna get to it and do some other stuff that needs to be done.